Okay, tell me if this sounds familiar to any of you out there. You are kind of new to psychedelics, or maybe you've been taking psychedelics for a while. You're really passionate about the idea of using psychedelics for psychedelic therapy and personal development, personal healing. And everywhere you go, all the blog posts and the Reddit posts and the videos and whatever you've watched, you keep hearing this term of psychedelic integration. You see it all over the place. Integration, integration, integration. And you get from all of this content that you're taking in, that's something incredibly important, and it's something you're worried about doing and making sure you get right, and you want to make sure you're integrating, but you don't know what it is. You don't have no clue how to go about doing it. You have no clue specifically what integration entails. You just know that it's important and it's something you should be doing. So if this is you or someone you know, and you want to learn more about integration, the reason I'm making this video is exactly for this kind of situation. And so what I want to do in this video with you guys here is lay out 11 kind of common classic examples that I've seen or experienced myself over the years of different scenarios where integration would be useful or helpful or appropriate. So if you're interested in this topic, please watch on. I think you'll get a lot out of it. Okay, before we go ahead and start trying to give examples to illustrate more about what exactly integration really is, I want to try to just give you kind of a ballpark definition up front here as concisely as I can to really start to give you a better grasp of the concept and what is meant by integration, okay? So I think a simple way of describing it would be that integration is the process of taking certain key experiences, states, or insights that you've had with your time on psychedelics and bringing those back into your personality structure or your persona or into your day-to-day lived life as more of maybe a character trait or a filter to live life through or a mode of operating. So what we're doing is we're taking something that emerged in the kind of fertile chaos of the psychedelic experience. You have these emergent moments of profound wisdom or insight or breakthrough, and we are reconnecting that back into your system as it normally works so that your system starts to work a little bit differently, right? So we're kind of using the idea that you are a complex system here, and we are connecting parts of that system back to itself in a way that helps transform your system, i.e. you, in a positive direction, in a direction that serves really what you want or what you need or is going to be healing for you in your life. So I hope that's clear. I hope that makes sense, right? So we're not, to distinguish that a little bit, we are not always integrating everything that comes up in a psychedelic session. We are not always integrating things that just have no context, don't make sense, or if we reintroduce them to your system, aren't going to have any significant impact one way or the other. So neutral insights, negative insights, confusing insights may not be worth integrating. We are not necessarily going to be integrating if what you actually need is just grounding. Like let's say you just bit off more than you could chew with the medicine, or the medicine hit you harder than you expected, what have you, and you end up ungrounded, rattled, shaken, destabilized, confused, for a day or days or a week or weeks after a session. That's also not necessarily, in my book, the same thing as integration. That's grounding work. That's coming back to your body, coming back to your senses. That's recalibrating your nervous system. Not the same thing. So integration, just to kind of reiterate here, is the process of taking certain key insights, certain key experiences, breakthroughs, realizations, key states, key peak moments that when we bring them back into your daily system, improve your life in a practical way. The real emphasis here with integration is on behavioral transformation, is on state transformation, is on mindset transformation in a way that's really practically demonstrable in your everyday life. So I hope that clarifies a bit. Okay, with that being said, I want to give a few kind of caveats here before we kind of get into the list of the different examples. So let's caveat away here. Caveat number one would be that there is no real consensus in the psychedelic therapy community as it stands here in early 2023 about what exactly integration is, let alone how it's done, how it's approached. There are a lot of different answers out there. If you poke around, you will see different therapists with very different perspectives. So do bear that in mind. I think in general, there is consensus that it is an important and useful part of the kind of post-trip support, piece of work here to make sure that you are having these moments of breakthrough that are fresh and new and not necessarily a robust part of you be supported and become a more robust part of you. I think there's a lot of agreement about that, but I don't think there's a lot of agreement about what exactly this process really entails, how it looks, or how it's done. I would certainly recommend that you read around and look around, but I want you to know that what you're going to find, if you think this is a clearly defined, well-known industry standard thing, is that's far from the truth, okay? Second caveat I want you to know here. I feel like this is a specialty of mine as a coach, as a hypnotherapist. I have a pretty deep understanding of how to rewire the brain and personal transformation and how this works, how to unlock things, how to recondition things into our personality structures and behavior structures. And so I have a rather strong and clear opinion about what this is. This is also grounded in my own experience of being a psychonaut for 30 years, having done a shit ton of psychedelics, had a lot of spiritual experiences and breakthroughs and, ego death experiences, and you name it, I've chased it. And so I know this from firsthand experience when something is integrated versus when it isn't. So please do take that with a grain of salt. My opinions are strong, they are distinct, but that doesn't mean that that's the full truth of the territory here. This is just my perspective. Third caveat here is that a lot of what I'm going to share in this list here really can overlap, or there will be situations which could be described through multiples of these different perspectives. So I want you to understand that sometimes you're in a situation where integration is appropriate, and there are different ways you could describe the same thing. And I think this is often true in therapy and in psychology in general, that there are multiple avenues or facets or windows into a central experience or phenomenon that we could describe through different languages and models of understanding. So I want you to understand that as well. As I go through this list and I start explaining it to you, you might go, well, yeah, but isn't this that one? And perhaps so. To be fair to you, there are many ways to describe some of these experiences, but I want to try to kind of unpack some of the basic common scenarios. Okay, with all those caveats out of the way, let's go ahead and just get into the list here, and I'll start explaining to you some of the examples where integration really is kind of warranted and probably a good idea. By the way, these are in no particular order. I'm not saying that any of these are more important than the other. This is just kind of the list as I've generated it. And also, by the way, I'm not going to claim that this is a comprehensive list of all the types of integration. These are just 11 that, as I kind of brainstormed, came up in my mind as being pretty self-evident, pretty obvious, pretty common, based on my own experiences, again, and on the experience of a lot of friends and people I've known through the years and clients I've worked with, this kind of a thing. So this is not a definitive list. This is just an entry point for you to start to understand a bit more. Okay, enough said. First one that I want to speak about here is archetypal integration, right? So this would be a very kind of Jungian lens on integration. Sometimes what emerges in a psychedelic experience is an aspect of our personality, or maybe of the collective palette or variety of personalities that we start to realize is inside of us, that maybe comes out in little moments or hasn't come out in moments, but is starting to come out and show itself within us. And it's rather archetypal. And so I'll give a couple examples here of what I mean. So one example might be, let's say you are generally kind of a well-controlled, mature adult personality, but inside of you there lives a trickster that likes to come out and tease people or poke fun or cause a little bit of playful mayhem, right? This is a very archetypal thing. You might have your inner wise person and your inner trickster. Now, if you're not in touch with your inner trickster, and then all of a sudden you take a psychedelic medicine, you have this experience where maybe the medicine is really showing you have this very trickstery, playful, slightly chaotic, but fun-spirited side to your psyche or side to your personality, this might be a case where you want to start to integrate that archetype into your life because it brings qualities and capabilities with it that maybe you've been out of touch with inside of yourself. Another obvious example here would be in the gender spectrum there. If you're someone who traditionally identifies in a pretty standard, one end of the gender spectrum, and then all of a sudden during a medicine experience, you have an experience of the other polarity, the other gender inside of you, right? So if you're a strongly masculine identified person, all of a sudden you get in touch with your inner feminine, your what would be called the anima in Jungian terms, right? Or the other way around, you're a strongly feminine identified person, and you have this experience of your own inner masculine, right? And it's clearly a part of you. It's clearly archetypally that polarity. And this would be another example where you'd probably want to integrate that other polarity into yourself and round out your personality, round out your character, round out your psyche, and expand your palette of capabilities and how you express and show up and interact with the world. So the first example here would be archetypal integration. Another common scenario here that you'll get a lot is temporal integration, right? So maybe you remember a younger part of you that kind of pops up and you have this whole wellspring of this certain phase in this moment of your life. Maybe it was from your teenage years or junior high or from when you're a little kid or other way around. Sometimes people get a future self memory, as strange as that. Psychedelics are strange, right? So, where you get a sense of your future self or potential self that you could be further on down your timeline of your life. Or it could be, a connection of your future self and of your past self, or an alignment of your present, future, and past in all kinds of different constellations, right? So this is another form of integration work where we want to be aligning the different aspects of our psyche along kind of the different phases of our life and connecting them. Because, for example, if they're not connected, you could be living in a present moment that is not really clearly attuned to your future self and not serving the future you want to grow into. And actually you're working against yourself because you're not taking the right actions. Another issue that can come up is you have some past self that needs healing or needs honoring or needs connecting to or needs contextualizing inside of your personality and brought back into the fold that's wanting expression or to be connected to again. That if you don't, might cause you to act out and do little subtle things that are kind of maybe working against the larger whole of your life and the system of your relationships and the system of your persona and identity as it exists as an adult. So this is another example of where you'd want to integrate, right? If you have these awarenesses of past selves, future selves, you want to bring that all into a nice container where you're seeing yourself more holistically over a broader scope of time. So that would be temporal integration. I can't believe I forgot to say this. Along inside of temporal integration, huge one that happens for a lot of people is ancestral stuff, right? So remembering ancestral strengths or tendencies or kind of genetic memories, but also ancestral wounding, right? Ancestral trauma, resolving ancestral trauma. If that starts to come up, you realize that maybe people from your lineage, there's a lot of pain or a lot of sadness or a lot of grief that needs honoring and healing there. That would be another thing to integrate and start to work inside of yourself. Denying the ancestral can have really big impacts on us. This is another huge piece of integration that I'm kind of tagging on here because I forgot to mention it. Super important. So yeah, ancestral integration would be another form of temporal integration. Okay, let's move to the next. Okay, another form of integration work that's pretty common and kind of intuitive, and again, these overlap a lot, would be developmental integration, right? So maybe, again, there's a part of you that's an inner child or an inner teenager or an adult self. And if you've compartmentalized those phases of your life and, blocked yourself off from remembering or accessing, and this starts to pop up in a psychedelic session, you start to remember how it felt when you were a teenager and you were 12 and you felt awkward, or how it felt when you were 8 and you were fascinated with whatever you loved when you were 8 years old, and how amazing and inspiring perhaps the world felt, et cetera, et cetera. You want to be integrating the different phases of your development into your current self so that you're not in repression or suppression. You're not letting those things then control you unconsciously, but rather you've really taken ownership of them, and any strengths, any gifts that exist in these younger parts of you, and also any pain, any charges, any traumas, any static in the system. You've also started to release and heal and integrate whatever happened, so that's put properly in its place in the sum total of who you are now. Another super common one that I see all the time, both in psychedelic sessions and just in general with clients, is parts integration. This is kind of a specialty of mine, doing a lot of parts work with people these days. And parts integration is essentially when you have different facets of your personality that express themselves in different moments that might, work against each other, is usually where this becomes a problem, where we have internal conflicts where one aspect of ourselves doesn't like another aspect of ourselves. They are in conflict, or they have different agendas or different needs, and they push and pull against each other inside of you and kind of drag you in different directions. And so your behavior looks unintegrated. You kind of flip-flop from different, perspectives or different things. One day you're super mature and you're badass and you're hyper getting everything done and you have a lot of grit and tenacity and focus. And then you flip-flop and you fall apart, and you are really indulgent and you're really lazy and you have a lot of fragile, sensitive emotions, and you're really overwhelmed by everything, and everything's too much and it's too much and it's too much. And then you flip-flop back over into being badass and taking charge and doing things. Something like that might be a parts conflict. This is something you see a lot. Another common example of a parts conflict might be your inner self-critic or your inner judge, and then some part of you that's carrying an issue or problem for a particular unconscious reason. There's an unconscious benefit there, or connects to an older part of you where this problem was actually potentially a resource at an earlier point in your life. And your inner critic and your inner, part of you carrying the problem are in conflict. And this is another place where it's really helpful to integrate these two, bring them together. Again, the idea with integration is we are connecting parts of a system that might seem fragmented or split off from each other or not functioning together in harmony into a higher order wholeness that includes all these different aspects of ourselves in a way where we can fluidly shift between the different aspects of our personality into a higher functioning version of ourselves. So when we have these parts conflicts, it can be really problematic. A lot of times in psychedelic experiences, parts come up often as regressions, right? So as a younger version of ourselves, but not always. It could be, again, a part of us that's, archetypally kind of been repressed. But you have a part that comes up and it wants to be heard and felt and seen and connected to. And generally speaking, these parts have their own value systems. They're almost like little sub-personalities. They have their own value systems. They have their own needs. They have their own orientation, the things they're focused on and the things that they want to achieve, the things that they want for you. And so when we integrate that, we honor that. We bring that into the wholeness of who you are so that the part can be supported, connected to, respected, heard, learned from, and all the gifts that these little sub-personalities have. Because a lot of times, like, a part can have its own strengths, also get integrated into the wholeness. So the rest of your personality now has those gifts too. So parts integration, very common, very important. So this would be another example of integration. This next example is one that's probably a bit of a cliche when in the psychedelic therapy world. And again, we're kind of turning back towards the Jungian perspective here. To be clear, I'm not always a fan of the Jungian thing, but there are a lot of things I think, Jung got right, but it's also articulated in a way that I think makes it more dramatic than it needs to be. And this is kind of an example of that in my mind, and that's shadow integration, right? So shadow integration, generally speaking, is when a part of us, or an archetypal aspect of us pops up that was earlier when we were younger. There was no context for it. There was no room to express or embody that part of ourselves. And generally, we were socialized out of being accepted for having this aspect of ourselves. So for a lot of people, that might be being really attention seeking. That might be being really sexual and really in your body and your sensuality. That might be being selfish. That might be being aggressive or being violent or hyper assertive. These are all things that are really common for kids to have kind of socialized out of them by parents who are trying to, again, teach the kid how to operate functionally in society, which means maybe not always letting these kind of darker, self-driven agendas, rule our behavior, right? And so what happens is that these kind of get suppressed into the unconscious, and then they're operating unconsciously, driving us to do behaviors impulsively, because this is what the unconscious mind does. It communicates via impulse a lot of the time. And then those impulses can, if we're not being conscious of them and not aware of where they're coming from in us and why we're feeling them and what the needs are connected to them, they can end up controlling us, right? And so you see this a lot with people who are impulsively sexual. You see this a lot with people who are impulsively selfish or indulgent, or put on, an agreeable persona, a fake people pleaser personality to make everyone happy in their lives, but secretly, have resentment or rage issues or, violent impulses, things like this, right? So shadow integration is when we become aware of an aspect of ourselves that's like this, that's angry, or that's horny, or that's, rebellious, or that's whatever. And we bring that into our personality consciously, connecting to it, honoring it, listening to it, integrating it again into the larger system of who you are to make you more functional, to put you in touch with the needs that are connected to that aspect of yourself so that you can meet those needs consciously, so that you can, again, pull from those skills that shadow aspect of yourself may have. For example, if there's kind of a violent, aggressive shadow aspect and you integrate that, this is kind of a cliche. If you've ever seen a Jordan Peterson video, you've probably heard him say this. You integrate something like that, and then you have more of an ability to be assertive. You have more of an ability to know how to lean in and not back down when it's time to lean in and not back down. So that becomes really valuable and useful if you're leaning into your own wholeness. So that's shadow integration. I do think there are other ways to get there, again, that are sometimes this idea of shadow work gets overly dramatically kind of memed and emphasized in the psychedelic therapy community and the conscious community in general, and turns into this like thing, rather than just one view of understanding the multiple layers of being a human being and kind of the primal aspects of being a human being and how we want to relate to that. It gets turned into this like kind of meme that I think distorts the understanding and kind of dramatizes what shadow work really is in my own experience. So, but yeah, that's shadow integration. Pretty archetypal, pretty classic, pretty important. Let's be honest. If you are not taking stock of these aspects of yourself, the desirous, the lustful, the angry, the impulsive, the aggressive, and not bringing those into your personality in a healthy way that serves you, that serves life, that serves those that you love around you in a positive way, that really can bite you in the ass. So shadow integration all the way. Okay, another classic example of integration here that I end up doing a lot of work with people on. This is a very common one in my experience, and I think is kind of represents the classic integration scenario in a lot of psychedelic experiences that I've seen, is values integration. Now, let me try to define a little bit what I mean by values, because it's one of these words that has a lot of connotations depending on what part of culture you come from, and also can be a little vague, even though it's a very common, ubiquitous part of what it means to be a human being. So your values are essentially whatever it is that you find is important in life, right? So your values are generally abstract qualities of life that you find deeply, profoundly important. So these are kind of like principles of living, or the general types of experiences and way of living life that is important to you. Now, one of the important things to understand about values is that our value systems change depending on our life experiences. They shift. It's also important to understand that different people have different value systems, and it's really our value systems that shape the kind of life we have and the kind of actions we take and what we're motivated around. So that's kind of the nutshell on values. So a lot of times what happens in a psychedelic experience is you have a sudden awareness of a new value or a new set of values arising for you that you realize is really profoundly meaningful or poignant or important or beautiful or aspirational. And all of a sudden you have this value system arise in your awareness. And then the task is, okay, I want to start to organize my life around this principle that I'm realizing here. How do I do that? And that's what values integration would be. So to give an example here, a classic example, kind of almost to a cliche point in the psychedelic, space beyond even psychedelic therapy would be someone has a realization that love is the most important thing in life. And the most important thing to do is to live in alignment with love, or live in alignment with compassion, or to live in alignment with kindness, right? So that's a value system. That's an emerging value system. Now, for some people, this comes from obviously interacting with maybe literature or ideas that kind of seed these insights. And sometimes these insights just are emergent. They just kind of arise out of our unconscious, and we're like, oh shit, love really is the answer. Love really is the most important thing in the universe. I need to live more from a place of love, right? This is very common. So that would be what we would integrate then. We take that insight and that valuing and that awareness of love, and we plug that back into your personality and help you start to transform the way you live your life through this lens of love, from the place of love inside of yourself. So that's values integration. And again, I think that this often is probably, I would say probably a bigger chunk of the integration scenarios. This is very common that some form of value system arises, and then it's time to integrate that and turn ourselves into an upgraded version of ourselves that's living from a new leveled up value system. So that's values integration. And another really common example, in addition to values and in addition to shadow work or, all this other stuff, another really common one that we bump into a lot is motivational integration. So this is essentially when you get some sort of message, really direct, clear message from your, let's call it inner guidance system or higher self or true self, your core, however you want to think of that. And you get a message to do something different in your life, right? So you get something like eat better, exercise more, start being nicer to people, go apologize to so-and-so that you were kind of rude to last week, whatever. You get these really practical, doable, behavioral changes from your inner guidance system, right? And so then that can require integration work afterwards, because all of a sudden you're like, okay, great. I know I need to start doing this, but I don't feel like doing it. It's not a habit of mine yet. It's not something that I really know how to do. I have the homework, but like, how the hell do I do this? That's really where integration work can come in super handy. So yeah, motivational integration, another huge, very common thing. Okay, another one that I see a lot, but I think is less spoken about, it's one of these things that people just don't notice as often, is conscious and unconscious integration. I do think there's an argument to be made for those of you that are into the idea of enlightenment and spiritual awakening and spirituality, particularly Buddhist or Hindu frames around that. And you have this idea of enlightenment. I do think one way of potentially describing enlightenment is the full integration of the conscious and unconscious mind into a whole system that's operating in full consciousness. I think that's one way to think about it. But regardless of that, conscious and unconscious integration often comes up where maybe you have a whole way that you've been living your life and you've been out of touch with, again, your shadow, or a whole other aspect of your personality that you're suppressing or hiding, or you have, impulses at the unconscious level that are totally opposite to how you perceive yourself on the conscious level. For example, let me give a great example from a recent experience of mine. You have a personality where you are really agreeable. You're really people pleasing. You're really, you try to make everyone happy. You try to do what everyone wants. This is very common, and maybe you don't even like being that way. Maybe you realize it's kind of fake. Maybe you realize it's driven from insecurity, anxiety, from trying to escape being judged or having conflict because you're afraid of conflict. And that's all you really see of yourself. That's all you really know or realize at a conscious level. But at an unconscious level, maybe there's a desire for conflict, or a desire to assert yourself and push back, or a desire to take charge and control things, because generally speaking, consciously, you don't control things. You let other people control everything, and you just kind of people please your way around the people who are taking control of things, right? Does this sound familiar? So this would be another example of conscious-unconscious integration, where your unconscious has a pattern that's totally different from what you see or believe about yourself, your persona, your personality on a conscious level. So there are a lot of different examples of ways this can go, and not all are necessarily positive versus negative, or friendly versus asocial, or something like that, antisocial. It could also be like your unconscious, there's a bunch of wisdom, right? There's a bunch of intelligence. There's a bunch of power, a bunch of gifts waiting to come out. And in your conscious mind, you just think of yourself as kind of like a weak, not competent, kind of clueless kind of person, right? This is another example. I've seen this happen a bunch with quite a few people in my life, where their personalities, they were raised, consciously, they think of themselves as this kind of like, oh, I can't do anything kind of person, but underneath there's this deep drive for giving their gifts and sharing. So this is another thing to really look for in yourself, is these incongruencies between your conscious and unconscious. And if you're unconscious, when would you integrate this? When your unconscious starts to express this and you start to feel those impulses and realize that it's there. If you don't realize it's there, this is not the kind of thing where you want to be trying to integrate something just because it sounds like a good idea, but you don't know if it's really there or not. This is the kind of thing you want to be looking for. Oh, I had this experience on psychedelics, and I realized that there's a deep part of me that wants to, do this thing that isn't normally a part of how I see myself or what I know about myself to be true. And, what do I do with that? So conscious-unconscious integration would be another very common example. And along a similar line to what we were just talking about with motivational integration, where it's like, go take this action, go back to school, go blah, 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 go ask that person out that you think is cute or whatever. There's also just more broadly kind of spiritual, personal, mental, emotional homework, right? Sometimes your inner guidance, again, says something to you, or it's like, you need to start working on this more. You need to start moving in this direction more, and it's just generally a shift in orientation in your life, or principles in your life, or this is the next thing you need to do to grow and actualize yourself. And a lot of times you don't even know what this is. I see memes like this all the time on Instagram, where people are kind of, making fun of or playing with the truth, that developmentally, if we're being guided by kind of our spiritual essence or our spiritual core, our higher self, a lot of times you don't know what the real big outcome is. You just get these pieces of homework. Okay, great. You've been doing good with this. Now go and do that, right? And it might be, your homework is now to learn how to become self-sufficient and live off the land. Your homework is now to go move to a city and learn how to feel centered and peaceful in the midst of the urban wildness and chaos. Your, inner guidance might say something like, it's time to learn how to feel your feelings more and really connect to yourself. Your guidance might say it's time to learn how to be, more centered and more strong and not so swayed by, et cetera, et cetera. Homework can be all over the place, but it's important to integrate this because, again, this is a message coming from within you, from within some part of you that, generally speaking, if you outside of the psychedelic experience, look at it, it's going to make sense how that improves your life, right? You're like, oh, right, of course. Yes, if I, work at being more patient, that's going to benefit my life, right? Like for someone who maybe struggles with patience. So this is something to follow. This is something that you might need integration support with because you're like, okay, I know my higher self is telling me to be more patient, but I'm not a patient person and I don't know how to be patient, right? So this is where playing with this, exploring with this, working with someone who can help support you to integrate something like that becomes really key, becomes really crucial, because left to your own devices, you may not know how to get from A to B. You just know what the next step is. So yeah, this would be another huge one. It's just kind of general homework and personal development stuff. Another absolutely massive, important one that I'm always talking about here on the channel is resource state integration. So what do I mean by that? Let's say you have an experience and you access a profoundly positive feeling on psychedelics that maybe you haven't felt before or haven't felt since maybe you were a little kid and the world felt magical. And it's just absolutely redefined your view of yourself or your view of the cosmos or the world around us or people. And it's really filled you with this whole new feeling. For example, you have an experience of oneness and now you're tuned in to this notion that everything is all one and everything in life is interconnected and deeply, profoundly beautiful. Or you have this state of absolute profound peace for the first time in your life. There's no mental chatter, no emotional turmoil, just perfect clarity and peace. And you realize that if you could integrate peace into your life more often, it would be an absolute fucking game changer for you. Or you have a moment of profound confidence, right? This awakening of self-belief and energy and vibrance and strength and the ability to do things. Your own power suddenly arises inside of you and you're like, wow, I can make shit happen. There's a world of possibility out there and I am a powerful person, right? Integrating that is going to be huge, and it could be whatever. It could be bliss. It could be joy and lightheartedness. It could be curiosity and open-mindedness. It could be compassion and kindness. There are all these big, powerful resource states. These are states that we can draw from that give us a way of being in life to kind of buffer us against challenge, to support us when times get tough, to empower the way that we relate, to kind of level up the way we're functioning, if that makes sense. So a resource state would be anything that's really powerfully positive that suggests a better way of being or functioning for you. And this, there's a bunch of my training is really around how to help people access resource states and how to turn that into transformation. If you know what you're doing with resource states, you can absolutely use them to rewire your brain and clear issues from your life permanently. And there's science that backs this up. There are techniques in therapy that are not so well known that are all about this. This is a thing. This is not just my imagination here, okay? And so this is something that when it comes to psychedelics, generally speaking, okay, here's my two observations. I'm kind of getting excited and rambling a little bit here. My two observations. One of the major issues in our world is that most adults out there are very weak when it comes to accessing resource states inside of themselves and very strong at accessing problem states inside of themselves. Have you noticed this? Where it's like you have a really hard time feeling bliss or joy or overwhelming compassion or a profound optimism that gives you the strength to move on, but you're really good at feeling demotivated, demoralized, and overwhelmed, and sad, and anxious, and depressed, right? That's observation number one. Observation number two is psychedelics are probably, that and spiritual practice are going to be your two domains where you're most likely to have a profound positive experience that's so big and so overwhelming, it redefines your sense of self and redefines what's possible for you in your life. Right? Now, if you have one of these types of experiences, which are incredibly common on psychedelics, especially if you get set and setting right and you get all the things properly dialed in. Being aware of that is one thing. Knowing you have the capacity to feel that way, or that those feelings are native to you, or that that's part of being a human being, is beautiful and life-affirming and important, and that alone can provide relief for people. But the real fucking magic is when we take these resource states and we weave them back into how we are embodied, who we are being in the world. So that that resource state is not just a passing thing that just kind of drifts through your nervous system and then goes off in the past the way your dreams every night do, but rather is something that becomes a part of your character, goes from a state to a little bit of a trait. That's really what we're talking about with integration here, turning states into traits, into ways of being, ways of showing up, filters that we view life through, strategies that we operate through that are healthier, that are better, that are more functional, that are more empowering, that are more fulfilling, that are win-win, right? And so resource states and integrating resource states is a huge one. And it's really, quite frankly, why I got in this whole field and what I'm most driven by. Because to me, to be able to touch those kinds of states and to have spiritual experiences and spiritual awakenings and bliss and ecstasy and profound love for all of life, but then to have that keep just like disappearing and fading away out of your life, and it's just a thing you know is there, but you don't know how to get to unless you're taking psychedelics or constantly doing spiritual practices, seems to me a major gap where humanity is missing out on the best of what it means to be a human being. And not weaving that back into our own lives, therefore not enjoying our own lives as deeply as we could, and not weaving it into the way we relate to others, and therefore not bringing that into the world to the degree we could. So this is my area of passion. As you can tell, I'm kind of rambling on about it. So obviously I've got a lot of juice around it. But yeah, just so you know, resource state integration is a thing, and it's a big thing. So enough said. Let's get on to the next one. Okay, and the last example I want to give here is something that, believe it or not, depending on whatever your kind of bias and how you experience life is, this might sound a little shocking or surprising, but it's internal and external awareness integration. So what you'll find a lot is if you talk to enough people and you kind of unpack how they experience life, there are a lot of people out there who developmentally, for whatever reason, were required to only become either aware of the external world, in other words, others around them, what's physically going on in the environment, what is their own body doing externally, what are the mechanics of what's going on and in material life around us. Or there are people who have the opposite, who really only develop internal awareness. They're only really good at tracking their own emotions and their own feelings and their own thoughts and their own body sensations and what all of that means subjectively. And they're actually not very skilled at really paying close attention to what's going on around them in the environment. And so this is another form of integration, to really align and integrate what your inner self and your inner awareness and your outer awareness is, so that that's all in alignment, so that when something is happening around you that causes you to feel a certain way, that you're also aware of what's happening internally. Or the other way around, when you're, really something's happening internally for you, you're really aware of how that impacts your behavior and impacts how other people feel around you, as an example. This is a really important piece of personal healing and personal development, personal growth work that a lot of people kind of overlook or downplay, but becoming integrated so that your inner subjective is connected to your outer experience and your outer is connected to your inner in a really clear, aligned way is really profound. Another great example of this is when we are relating in a healthy way with others. We have what's called congruence between our internal state and our expression of our behavior. This sends signals to the other person of honesty and trustworthiness, and that creates a sense of safety for others. So part of really healthy relating is continuing to relate in a way that reinforces safety signals for each other so that we know we are safe with each other, right? Because the nervous system is built for human connection, which is organized first and foremost around safety, just like every other life form out there, right? So we're built for safety, and we look to other people for cues of safety. And one of the major cues is the alignment between what we can see happening with their physiology, right? So what's going on with their body language, and what are they saying, and what are they doing, and do those things line up, right? Now, because of this, if you know that and you want to build really good relationships with people, and you want to have more connection and more trust and more rapport and more ease in your relationships with people, one of the things you can do is really be honest externally and congruent externally with what you're feeling internally, so that people start to know over time interacting with you that they can trust whatever you're saying or doing is an aligned, congruent, honest signal from whatever's happening for you internally. This is one of these areas, where we start to get into the relational from psychedelics and from spirituality. It's so important because so much of the wounding we have that we're healing and transforming is rooted in the relational. Let's be honest. So much of what we carry as wounds ultimately boils down to other people and our relationships, right? And one of the foundational things that's wounding is when we think things are a certain way with a person and it turns out they're not that way. We think we're safe and then they do something to harm us, right? We think that we're close with somebody and it turns out they do something that demonstrates we're not as close as we thought they were. We think that someone understands us, turns out they don't understand us at all and they're projecting on us, et cetera, et cetera. These discrepancies between inner and outer really make a huge difference in terms of, safety with each other, health, emotional well-being, relational well-being, connection, connectivity, feeling grounded in your life circumstance, etc. Right? And so I want to encourage you to, if you're not attuned to your own internal, to start to learn how to attune to your internal, or if you're not attuned to your external, to start to learn how to be attuned to that and learn how to line all of that up. And this is one of these things that psychedelics give us these glimpses of. You'll have these moments where your senses are working super sharp, right? And you are able to track all kinds of amazing, subtle things actually happening in your environment. I'm not talking about hallucinations or optical weirdness. I'm talking about actually seeing really real things that are subtle things happening in your environment that you catch really easily, right? Because your senses are so sharp. And part of the reason that you're able to pay such clear attention externally is often this happens when we're feeling resolved internally. We're feeling really balanced. We're feeling really connected to our own body. We're feeling safe in our own skin. We're feeling full of vitality and life force. And we're in this empowered place that I think is actually very primal, very animalistic, in a very high functioning way, where we have all of this life force and all of this primal internal strength and well-being being channeled into attunement to our external environment. And all of that is working synergistically. So this would be the last one to think about. If you are someone who struggles, with one or the other, sometimes moving to the other can be the thing that can be really balancing, really healing for you. So this is another thing to integrate here. If you all of a sudden get more awareness of people or the external, or you get more awareness of your internal, starting to integrate that so that becomes a part of your daily way of being can be absolutely life-changing and transforming. So we'll leave it there with internal and external awareness integration. Okay, so just a really quick summary. These are just 11 types of integration that I've noticed are very common, that I've experienced myself, that I support other people's with. Like I said, this is kind of a huge part of what I do, and one of my areas I feel in terms of strengths that I have as a coach. I'd love to know what you think. I'd love to know if these resonate for you. I'd love to know if there's other forms of integration that you're curious about or that you've noticed that you want to kind of add in the comments below, or other thoughts or impressions you have about this whole area of psychedelic integration work. I think this is a really promising field. I think there's so much here when it comes to turning these moments of breakthrough and insight and well-being, or discovering new facets of who we are as these deep, profoundly beautiful, complex beings, and bringing that back into the material world. To me, it's super exciting work. So I think we'll just kind of leave it there. Much love to you, whoever you are, wherever you are. Thank you for your time and attention if you watch this whole thing. And I would love to know what you think. So comment down below. And if you have any questions, you're always welcome to reach out to me. My email should be in the description down below, or you can DM me as well. So, okay, enough said for now. Psychedelic integration. I got plenty more to say about it, but this will do. Okay, much love. Take care.